Hey fearsome friends, I'm glad you're enjoying the new series. I have another one coming soon too, so watch this space. Tonight I have more Let's Not Meet stories for you. I hope you enjoy them. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and share with all your friends. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. So this happened about 7 years ago, and the story starts with me getting home from high school on the bus. As I walked into the house, I saw that my mum wasn't home, and as my dad was at work, and my brother didn't get out of school until later, I was the only person there. Putting down my backpack and going to untie my shoes, some dude walked out from a hallway. I went into Occam's razor mode and assumed this was some sort of handyman repair guy, as we'd only recently moved in and had been getting a lot of work done to fix the half-assed DIY electrical, plumbing and paint jobs that had been left behind by the previous owners. Additionally, he was wearing some sort of tool belt and just fit the general repairman look. But my mum is usually around when we have people working on the house, so I assumed that my mum must have left not so long ago and would be back soon. I nonchalantly told the guy that my mum should be back soon, and he mumbled something like, "Thanks," and made his way out the front door to what I assumed was his truck. It was at this point that I texted my mum to ask when she'd be back, and who is the dude in the house. But she asked me if I was joking, and it was only at that point that I came to realize that I was sitting on the couch chatting with a dude that was burgling our house. The guy was long gone now, and luckily my mum was only a couple of minutes away at a store just down the road. She arrived home and we called the police immediately. Then they took a look around, but nothing had actually gone missing, and nothing really ever came of it. Honestly though, I'm glad it went down the way it did, as I only knew what happened once it was already over. This guy had put himself between me and the front door, and I'm really not sure what freaked out, fight or flight me would have done. I also can't imagine what the guy was thinking when I basically just let him walk out. So let me tell you about my neighborhood. I live in a poor part of town, a bit of a ghetto, a bit of the barrio, and a bit of the lower economic class of a cross-section of races. It's LA. The apartment complex spans a short block and it's dusty brown like the desert we live in. It's got 2 pools, lots of little Mexican children, and for the most part a pretty friendly population. Now I'm a destitute writer, so I spend my free time writing. When this happened, I was working mostly in the mornings and afternoons, and I would get home, hit the gym, and then settle in for an evening in front of the computer. It's pretty common for the evenings in the summer to be chaotic around our apartment complex, with kids playing in the pool, the ice cream man pushing his cart up and down the sidewalk, and women talking outside the laundry room. I do my own laundry, but I'm pretty much the only guy I see here doing it. So, it was nice. Poor but pleasant. It's like a mixed-race 21st century version of a 50s sitcom, and people will knock on your door, sometimes to borrow something. Now I cook, so neighbours pop by to find out the origins of the great aromas wafting from my kitchen window, and sometimes for a little help working on a broken-down car. But mostly it's kids selling candy bars or Christmas wrapping paper. Sometimes it can be jittery tweakers selling magazine subscriptions though, or old Mexican men selling bootleg DVDs, and lots of Jehovah's Witnesses. But because it's hot out, I leave my windows open as the AC isn't cheap and I'm broke, so I hope for the cross breeze. But that means I can't see anyone from where I sit and work. I can hear them clearly as they walk up to my door. But when I hear someone knock, I answer it. And besides buying the occasional candy bar, I smile, politely decline, wish them a nice day and send them off. No big deal. That evening was quiet, which was strange in and of itself, as I should have at least been able to hear the distant sound of ranchero music. I heard a couple of people walk up to my door then, and because I'm not the first in my courtyard, I will usually hear the salespeople as they knock on my neighbours' doors and work their way around to me. But not this time. Whoever it was walked right up to my door and knocked. So I got up to answer it. Reaching for the door handle, I got a chill go through my body, like I've never experienced. It was a cold tightness in my chest. I halted my hand movement towards the door handle and placed it flat on the door as if I was feeling for heat from a fire. I have a peephole on my door, but it never crossed my mind to use it. So I stood there with my hand flat on the door and just listened. They knocked again. Now, I don't scare easy, and I wasn't exactly afraid, but I was having a visceral experience all over my body, a base fear reaction. Just like I could hear them, they had heard me move to the door, and they knew I was inside. "Yes," I said. "Who is it?" A boy's voice answered. "We need to use your phone." "Yeah, that's not going to happen," I started laughing. It was a stress laugh that comes out when I'm in pain or under pressure, and they heard it. Neither of us moved for about a minute or two, a really, really long minute or two, when finally they walked away. Not to any of the other 8 doorways within 15 feet, not to ask anyone else. And before they could have gone more than a dozen yards, curiosity reasserted itself, and I yanked the door open, running after them to see who it was and where they were headed. But the courtyard of my complex was completely empty. Afterwards, I thought the experience fit the stories about black-eyed kids, and I kicked myself for not opening the door. Coming face to face with a black-eyed kid, how cool would that have been? But then I remembered that feeling of my skin crawling, and the certain knowledge in me that at that moment, there was no way in hell I was opening that door. To start this off first and foremost, I've had a pretty crazy life. My dad was pretty famous back in his day for stealing cars and money. And my mum, well, she's just a bipolar crazy mess. And together for some crazy reason, they thought having children would be the best idea. Not like they didn't curse us all with our own share of serious mental disorders. My older sister, who's 20, is seriously psychotic and has gone to a mental hospital a series of times because she's tried to kill me once or twice. And my younger sister, who's 11, is the epitome of anxiety. Then there's me at 17, and well, I have it all. I'm diagnosed with serious depression and anxiety. I get so anxious over the littlest things that I'll throw up or cry so hard that I get nosebleeds. I have no skin on the insides of my cheeks just from where I've bitten the living crap out of them, and my fingernails too. There's not much left of them due to my severe habit of biting them at any minor inconvenience. So you may be wondering where all this comes into play. So let me tell you that, to say the least, I think this event will stick with us all and haunt us for the rest of our lives. I come from a small town in northwest Ohio called Bryan, and we aren't well known for much other than drugs. But there was one thing that everyone loved, and that was the Jubilee. So let me set the stage, because it may be a little hard to understand. This was an event held every first week of July, and we had a very large and extravagant town square. Our courthouse was ginormous, almost like a castle, and our square was very spacious. Workers would spend an entire day hauling large fair rides, the sketchy ones that we've all taken a gamble with life or death on, and food trucks that basically sold diabetes for way more than what it was worth. A large parade was normally the opening for the start of the Jubilee, and every night they would have a different attraction, BMX riders flipping through flames, or one of those small cages with motorcycles spinning around. Now, my family wasn't the very social type. My mum is as introverted as they get, and my dad, He was just such a lard ass that he couldn't walk all that far. But we all got together every year to go to one night of the Jubilee. I would say we got there around 5:30, and I can just remember it was so warm and the summer air felt amazing. I must have been around 11-12 at the time, so this makes my little sister 6. Keep this in mind. My parents sent me and my older sister on our way with our wristbands so we could have the thrill of getting on these rides that were seamlessly put together in 4 hours, and I don't know what was more thrilling. The thought of dying on these old, sloppily put together death machines, or the ride itself. But they told us to meet back at 9:30 so we could head home. 9:30 was nearing, so my sister and I rode one last ride, and then we headed to the grass beside the courthouse where my mum and dad were taking care of my little sister, while the Lego movie was playing on a projector. We were parked a little off the square, so we had quite a bit of a walk in front of us, and this is where it gets important. The order of walking went, my older sister, me, and then my mum and dad and little sister, all in a line behind us. We had walked down the steps that connect the grass to the concrete where people park in the square. Then in front of us was the crosswalk to get across the road because we had parked on the other side. Now this was a main highway through our town, and traffic was at a pretty heavy stream, so we were very cautious to make sure that we yielded to the vehicles that were oncoming. We waited for what seemed to be an eternity, until the light turned red and we could cross. My older sister led the way, and I followed pretty closely behind her. But my parents were probably 2 feet behind us due to my dad's lack in shape. As we were walking, cars started to line up at the red light as per usual, when out of nowhere, I saw this one singular light beaming and approaching at a rapid speed. I remember thinking to myself, is this man going to slow down? But I knew soon after that he was not stopping for anything. It all happened so fast. 1 second we were crossing the street, and the next, I heard my dad scream out, "Grab her!" I whipped my head around to see a motorcycle almost plough my little sister's life completely out of her. When I looked down, I saw her tiny silver shiny flip-flops with motorcycle wheels imprinted on them, and my mum laying on the cold asphalt with my little sister on top of her, as pale as a ghost. I swear my brain was working in 5 million words a second, and I had no clue what to say. How does one even begin to process the sight of your little sister almost getting the soul knocked out of her? She is my life, and I have an insane urge to protect her no matter what, because of my parents' lack of doing their job, so I have never been more scared in my entire life. When I looked forward, there was a young woman that was the first car stopped at the red light. I swear to you her jaw must have been scraping the bottom of the car, it had dropped so wide. Later that night, my mum told me exactly what happened though. As we were walking, they'd seen the motorcycle coming, but unlike me, they knew he wasn't going to stop. He was coming so fast she only had a split second to react, as she threw herself to grab my little sister and fall on her back. The motorcycle ran straight between us. Fast forward a couple of days later, and my oldest sister, who was 18 at the time, happened to be dating the sheriff's son, so we asked him for some help. Luckily there was a street surveillance camera pointed directly at the crosswalk, and he said that when him and his cop buddies watched the tape back, they all said they felt sick watching the fear go through her eyes as some POS lowlife almost stole my innocent little sister's life. They clocked him going 104 through that crosswalk, and they ID scanned the license plate and found to their surprise that this was the same man that was wanted for rape, assault, and even one suspicion of murder. Sometime later they found him hiding out and completely strung off on heroin. They arrested him, and God, I hope that man is behind bars for a long time. I still think about it every now and then, and sometimes it makes me sick. I can't even begin to explain the feeling that pumped through me that night. It took me so long to process everything that happened, and to think it was so close. We still have those flip-flops stored away, and the black, burnt tire marks on them just show how crazy one could actually be, and just how fast life could get stolen away from you. Ever since then, I've learned to cherish the things that I have in life, because I never know when some freak accident might occur. This happened to me, a 24-year-old male, a few months back, and is something I'd almost forgotten about until a friend reminded me of it yesterday. It still freaks her out, and I don't blame her, because it bothers me too. One day, I had been walking to a convenience store from my apartment to get something, and it was around midday. It's only about a 5-minute walk, and is next to a college campus, so there was plenty of foot traffic, and it always felt relatively safe for being in a city. I was almost at the store when a dark SUV pulled up next to me, and the driver, a 25 to 30-year-old female, waved me down. She pointed her thumb to her back seat, then gave me a thumbs up. I got the impression that maybe there was someone I knew riding with her trying to say hey, as that wasn't actually unlikely. I'd gone to school here myself, and often ran into people I knew. But I couldn't see through her dark-tinted windows initially and told her, "I don't know what you're trying to tell me." "Where are you heading?" she asked, and her tone was light-hearted and casual. By this point I could see that there was no one, to my knowledge anyway, in the back seat at all. She both seemed put together and off-putting at the same time, and didn't seem quite young enough to be a student. I responded honestly and told her I was going to the convenience store, as I didn't really feel like there was any reason to lie. The campus was busy, the store would be busy, and again I was nearly there. "I'm going there too," she said. "Get in, I'll take you," gesturing to her back seat again. She was weirdly pushy, and it made so little sense to offer a ride when it was just around the corner. "No, that's okay. I want to walk and I'm on the phone with my mum," I replied, which was true. I was polite, but also wanted to make it clear that she was interrupting a conversation and I wasn't interested. She continued to drive slowly beside me though, and didn't seem fazed at all. "Don't worry, I'll talk to your mummy for you," she teased. "Come on, let's have a nice safe drive to the store." The way she said it was a little mockingly, as if I was being unreasonable for rejecting her weird offer. "I don't know you," I said, still trying to maintain a casual tone by laughing her off, but she didn't budge. "You're holding up traffic, just get in," she pressed. By this time there was a line of cars behind her because she was still inching along beside me. A few of them honked, because by this time the interaction had lasted about a minute. "You're the one holding up traffic because you're the one in the car," I responded, more firmly. I think at this point she realized I wasn't going to bite and said, "All right, I'll see you at the store then. Let's talk there." Then she finally drove off. I got to the convenience store about a minute later, and there was no sign of her or her car there, so she'd never actually stopped there. I'm not sure that if I had gotten in that car, that I would have ended up there either. I don't know what she wanted from me, but I'm guessing I looked like an easy target, because despite being 23 at the time, I've always looked more like an 18, 19-year-old. But either way, I'm pretty glad I never found out, and I hope we don't meet again. It was October 31st, Halloween, and at that time my parents were still together and hadn't divorced yet. So my siblings and I were with each other, but my family did this thing where half of us would go trick-or-treating with my mother and the other half went with my father. I have 5 siblings, but at this time my little sister hadn't been born yet, so it was just the 4 of us. Me and my sister, who is 3 years younger than me, went with my dad, and my little brother and sister went with my mother. I had called up some friends to ask them if they wanted to go trick-or-treating with me, but only one of them said that they could make it. Let's call her Elle. My dad picked up Elle and we drove to this big neighbourhood with beautiful houses and lots of candy. Elle and I then wandered off whilst my dad stayed with my sister. I was really hyper, and from time to time would run off and leave my friend behind so I could get more candy and get to every house before Halloween was over. But halfway through trick-or-treating, Elle and I walked so far that no more kids were around us. We chatted about school and drama and what we were going to do with our candy, stuff like that. And after what I would say was about 7 minutes, we heard a scraping kind of sound, like someone was dragging something along the concrete. We turned around to where the sound was coming from and saw a person dressed in a killer clown costume and holding a bat. They were walking, and Elle and I were walking in the middle of the street. Elle and I were walking in the middle of the street, confused and a little scared. I had always hated clowns, so I sped up a bit and so did Elle. We kept turning around to see the clown, and after about 30 seconds the clown stopped walking and stood there facing us. Now by this point it was quiet and we were very scared, so we told each other we should go meet up with my dad. We whipped our heads to see the clown once more, and out of nowhere he started running in full sprint towards us. We burst into a run ourselves, screaming and not even paying attention to where we were going. It was a steep and quiet road, like a back road, and the clown was screaming with us. I didn't turn back, but Elle later on told me that the clown was holding his bat up like he was going to hit us. We suddenly came to a corner that we noticed led to a familiar street, so we crossed the road without a thought, and when we'd reached the other side it was quiet. We didn't hear any more screaming. He was gone and was no longer behind us. After running around further, we eventually found my dad and told him everything. He thankfully believed us because of our tears and screams, and also most likely because we were 9-year-old children, and by the look of terror on our faces. My worst fear is now killer clowns, and forever will be. Elle and I will never forget that moment, and talk about it from time to time. It traumatized me, and thinking back to it now, the clown might have just been a dumbass teenager in a costume, trying to scare little kids. What a sicko. So I need to explain 2 things before I tell this story. Firstly, I have a sleep disorder, and I've had it my whole life, and sleepwalk. It's nothing too dramatic. I mostly just do everyday things whilst sleeping. Opening the fridge, putting clothes in the washer without starting it, taking the vacuum out of the closet and putting it in the middle of the room and leaving, that sort of thing. When I was younger, this was an every night occurrence though. But now, in my late 30s, this is a once or twice a year thing. Secondly, I'm native and have a healthy respect for the stories of spirits that my ancestors told. On many hunting trips, I would sit around the fire with my dad, listening to him tell stories of the tricks that Wendigos play to try to lure you to them. Now, while I'm unsure if I believe the stories of skinwalkers and Wendigos, I don't tend to mess around anyway, just in case. So fast forward to roughly 3 weeks ago. My husband and I both work construction, having hard, long and rewarding days. And once dinner is over, planning for the next day is complete, and the dogs have been taken out for the last time, our heads hit the pillows and it's lights out until the alarm sounds. We sleep like the dead. We're pretty sure a war could break out in our bedroom, thundering tanks and all, and we would sleep right through it, wondering in the morning where all the holes in the walls came from. Our bedroom is fairly good sized and has a small bay window in the corner, and my husband likes to sleep with fresh air, so he takes the window side of the bed. Now this particular night something woke me up, and I never wake up. The dogs were quiet and it was typical northwest weather outside. Rain quietly tapping away, no thunder and no heavy winds. I looked the dark and quiet room over, and nothing was out of place. and the only noise besides the rain was my husband's box fan gently humming away. I was confused but decided to adjust my blankets, flip my pillow and go back to sleep. However, as I closed my eyes and took a deep breath to relax, I heard my husband say, Babe, come out here and give me a hand with the boys." Confused and still foggy from being woken from a deep sleep a few seconds earlier, I opened my eyes to the pitch black of the room again. Rarely one of our 3 dogs will need to go out at night, and if one goes, they all go. We live in an incredibly rural area, and it's easy for them to get lost in the dark woods, which is not a good thing when you have bears, coyotes, cougars, and whatever else on your property. "Babe, can you come out here and help me with the boys?" he called again. His voice was right against the half-open window, and it wasn't concerned, just demanding. Annoyed and groggy, I leaned up, propping myself on a stiff pile of blankets to look at the window. But it was too dark to see him, and the floodlight is on the other side of the house. "Babe, come outside," my husband demanded. It was the third beckon that bothered me. He was never that pushy, and if something was wrong, like one of the dogs wandering off, then he would say that. It's happened before. He would say something like, "Come watch these 2 real quick, I can't find Murph." More like that. Something wasn't right. I was regaining my focus and shaking off the sleepies, quite awake at this point, and I knew it was him. My husband has a very distinctive voice, as he's Sicilian from Queens, and has a very deep, unintentionally loud voice. It was at that moment, staring out the black window, that I realized I wasn't leaning on a pile of blankets, and the pile of blankets was breathing. I was leaning on my sleeping husband, listening to him call to me from outside the window. "Babe, come outside." The voice came again from the window. I put my hand down on my husband's face. He was there, asleep next to me. But his voice, or what I thought was him, was at the window. I laid down next to him very closely and closed my eyes very tightly. In moments like these, I'm the type to just try and pretend it's not happening, and I thankfully didn't hear it again, spending the next half of the night trying to fight off the spookies, and had at some point finally fallen asleep. I told my husband about it the next morning, after his, "Oh my God, you look like death" comment, as I hadn't slept well. He laughed it off as I had. Probably had a creepy sleepwalking thing. But the thing is, when I have a sleepwalking event, I remember nothing. I don't recall dreaming, walking, or anything from those nights, no matter how hard I try. It's like a blackout. So I'm sure I was awake for this. Every time I've thought about it these past few weeks, I remember those hunting trips, poking coals around in the fire with a stick, while my dad told his serious yet animated tales of Wendigo tricks to get you to come to them. And as silly as it sounds, I think there's a Wendigo in my woods. So I went to the police station a few days ago to put in a complaint about someone who'd scammed me when I was trying to get a graphics card. You see, a guy who seemed nice enough overheard my conversation about needing a graphics card and proposed to me to come over to his place as he had spares of electronic equipment that he didn't use anymore and that he'd be glad to help out. Now, I didn't really have any hope for finding one with him, as it was unlikely that I'd find something interesting, but I took up his offer nonetheless. He didn't have that fishy person aura, so I got his address and said I'd be over in a few days. So a few days later, my brother and I went to the guy's house. Firstly, the guy wasn't wearing a mask, and out came his hand to shake mine. Looking around, I noticed an old guy in the background watching us, beer in hand, and I could see from where I was standing that the yard was a complete mess. He invited us inside and we took a look around. Then he started pulling stuff out of a bag. One thing in particular was like 15 to 20 years old, it was a graphics card, and it would be completely worthless, and I told him so. Then he ushered us to follow him to the garage, which was even more of a mess than the yard, with things lying around everywhere, and there was a very dirty pool that wasn't even covered despite it being winter. He showed us one of those first generations of graphic card, which was old and bulky, so of course I said that it wasn't going to work either. He took us then to a shed behind the house, with even more things. It was a shady place in a weird alley, and I freaked out a little, because the older guy who hadn't said a single word was following us. He rummaged through his shed, telling me the card he'd intended to give me was somewhere, but he couldn't find it. Too bad. I was getting ready to leave now, but then he asked me if we could look at a PC that wouldn't boot up. I accepted and went back inside the house to a room that was apparently the kids' room and was just as messy as every other part of the house. I approached the computer and saw it was missing keys on the keyboard, and was kind of dirty. I sat down with my brother and started fiddling with the computer, and the granddad appeared out of nowhere and sat behind my brother, which kind of freaked me out, as he was looking at us weirdly. Just then I was trying to fix the PC, when the mother came in and told me she didn't know much about computers, but that she goes on the dark web, and asked me if I could check every device in the house to make sure they hadn't been pirated or that she wasn't being watched. At that point I looked at my brother confused, and we kind of mentally communicated yeah, we need to get out, it's starting to get weird. So I told the guy that I couldn't seem to fix it, and that it was all above my knowledge of computers, and he said that was okay. Then the old man lit up a cigarette and we got the hell out of there. However, the guy kept us back by talking to us for about 5 minutes, seemingly like they wanted us to stay. We told them we had a bus to catch and kind of walked quickly out of there, but the mother stopped us and asked if we were going to come back to inspect their devices, and I just said that we'd contact them again, panicked and blocked the number when I got out of there. I've told this story to nearly anyone I've been somewhat close to, but never shared it anywhere online. It isn't as bad as most of the other stories I see here, but my mind definitely didn't take it lightly, considering how much I cried and how long I've been refusing to leave the house after it happened. It took place in late May of 2018, when I was on my way back home after my old best friend's birthday party. I was 13 at the time. Her house was about 7 to 10 minutes away from mine, if you're on a bike, and basically next to a huge field at the end of the street. It takes me an even smaller amount of time to reach it, considering how fast I always ride, which is a really relevant part of the event. I'd had a lot of fun that day, and stayed after the majority of our other friends had left, which turned out to be a huge mistake. It was getting dark, so she decided to go back in the house, but I stayed outside playing with her neighbours until she called me to say that my mum was demanding I go home. I was really upset about it, but didn't want to make my mother mad and annoy my best friend, so I unenthusiastically complied, and before I left we took some pictures, and she gave me a flashlight since I'd forgotten to bring my bike light. We were at her gate and she was handing me the flashlight. We said our goodbyes, and the only thing I had on my mind was to not get caught by the cops for having an improper light. The moment she closed the gate and went back inside, I got this really sharp feeling in my stomach, which was a mix of adrenaline and getting stabbed without the actual pain. I'm guessing it's what's called a gut feeling. If it wasn't that, it was certainly some sort of sign at least. Now, I'm a really skeptical person, and rarely ever experience such things. But when I do, I struggle with determining if it's just me being paranoid, or if it's a real hunch. This was the most vivid thing ever, though. I'd been riding for about 30 seconds to a minute, when I got the urge to stop before a short concrete bridge that's a part of the road. I got a really big urge to just go back and ask my best friend of the time to come with me, or at least call my uncle to pick me up, which I knew would be too big of a hassle, since I had the bike with me. But the road I was on at that moment was on the right side of a really long one, which basically leads straight to the street where my house is. So I just kept going and ignored it. I think it was somewhere around 10 p.m. if my memory serves me correctly, and the area was pretty small, 6,000 people. So I didn't expect anyone to be on the streets except the cops that my stupid self thought would appear out of nowhere. And now I really wished there had been cops patrolling that night. I rode over the bridge and the streets were empty. That is until I saw a group of guys emerge from a road on the right-hand side, a bit further away from me where I was. They were walking in the same direction, so I didn't think they'd seen me. And at that point I slowed down and was contemplating what to do. I wanted to take another route, but I thought I'd get lost and run into them. So I was about to just hide behind the trees and bushes, wait for them to go away and continue making my way back. But I just kept going. I started riding at my normal speed then, but increased when I was a few meters away. As I was passing by them, one of them yelled something along the lines of, "Hey bitch." Then I saw two of them speeding up nearly to a run whilst attempting to get in front of me. Then one of them threw a really thick branch, or I don't even know what, at my wheel. I was already shaken up at that point, but just kept going and thought they were just drunk and messing around. Until I heard running. My blood literally froze and I became filled with dread, which is something I don't recall ever experiencing before that. Thoughts raced through my mind, knowing that there would be no one to help me if something did happen, as the streets were dead. Then one of them yelled something along the lines of, "It's not worth it," and the running stopped. As terrified as I was also relieved to know that they'd given up whatever they were trying to pull off, but it didn't stop me feeling like the last minute or two of my journey was a race with death. It all happened so quickly, but felt like an eternity. I literally bumped into the gate of my house, locked it, threw the bike on the ground and sprinted inside, locking the entrance to the house. My grandma greeted me and asked me why I was in such a rush, as she'd been watching me from the window, and I just started sobbing, telling her about what had just happened. I told her in a really messed up order with a lot of missing parts and weird words, so I'm not sure if she understood exactly what I was trying to say. But she told me she didn't see any men leaving that street. Our house is at the edge of an intersection, with 4 somewhat small roads, and from the windows of the living room she can see them perfectly, which meant they'd gone back instead of continuing their way. I don't know if they were just drunk and trying to scare me. And I don't even want to think about what would have happened if the branch had actually gotten in my wheel and had made me fall off my bike. Or what if I wasn't riding so fast? But maybe they would have turned back anyway, so I'd be in an even worse position if I'd hidden and waited. I have no clue at this point, but all I do know is that it had a huge impact on my already anxious self and my life during the next good 6 months. I quit going to dance classes because they would usually start at 9 p.m. and end at 11, and I stopped leaving the house except for school, and any time I had to walk back alone I was straight up sprinting to my house, regardless of it being 1 p.m. or 7 p.m. I don't remember the last time I left the house at night without being in a car. So I'm 34 years old, and this story is of my first creepy encounter. But listening to my mum talk before she died makes me think that my fate was and is to be a magnet for creeps, which means I have a lifetime of stories to tell you about. I've mentioned this particular story in several other of my posts, and now I have had time to poke about in my memories. I remember more of my feelings and thoughts rather than timelines, so I hope I don't mess it up too much. I was in 3rd grade at the time, which I think in my country is either 9 or 10 years old, and I was born on January 2nd, so I get confused with this a lot. In any case, I think it was autumn as it was warm, and I had been riding my bike to school in the mornings for a couple of weeks. The kids younger than the third graders weren't allowed to ride their bikes because of the busy road, and there was a college only 1 kilometre away, so students are driving around fast and the speed bumps were on a joke level. For some reason I'd stayed late that day, perhaps to be in the playground, but I can't remember. But what I do recall is when I left the schoolyard, there was a man only a short distance away who yelled, "Hey, come over here." I looked around to see who he was yelling at, but it was just me there. I don't even think there were any cars in the parking lot. I was worried he might have meant me, so I turned towards home, which was luckily in the opposite direction from this man. Then he yelled again, "Come here now, it's standing." Now standing is a slang term for a boner in my country, and I only knew at this age that this was something adults do and is very bad for kids. I sped up then and took what shortcuts I knew to lose him, but I think he was drunk, so it might have been unnecessary for me to do this, but I felt it was a must anyway. I finally got home, slammed the door shut, and didn't tell anyone until I was 25 to 30 years old. After spilling it to my best friend whilst drunk, she told me very gently she thought I might need therapy, and she was right. I'm not sure why I kept it a secret. Maybe I might have been scared to lose my privilege to ride a bike, although I'm quite sure Mum would never take away anything that I'd needed to get away from an adult harassing me. Or maybe I might have felt guilty for staying late at school. To this day, though, I can't be sure. My mum was a single parent, and I'd only see my dad 2 or 3 times a year up until he died when I was 15. This wasn't the last time I met a creep around my school. So I've been working from home for about 2 years now, and 3 weeks ago I was asked to go into the office. Then yesterday was my first day back working at home. Now we have one of those doorbell cameras, but it broke, and since I'm home all the time, we haven't bothered to get it fixed or replaced. We haven't taken it down either. We don't have a gate or anything. It's just the driveway then the door, so I have a clear view of the area from my bedroom window. At around 1 p.m. there was a knock at the door, so I looked out my window and saw a man, and he had a dark brown hoodie and jeans on. He didn't look like he was expecting someone to open the door, but he pressed the non-working doorbell a couple of times, and it seemed like he was paying more attention to the street, looking around nervously. Now when someone knocks at my door and I don't know them, I won't answer it. I just stay quiet until they leave. High five to social anxiety. But this time I got a weird feeling, like I had a heavy rock in my stomach and alarms going off in my head. So I yelled, "Coming!" He suddenly stood up straight and looked around some more, waited a few seconds, then walked away in a hurry. I watched him until he disappeared out of my view. And this was one of those moments when your instinct kicks in, and deep down you feel like something bad may have happened, and you can't stop thinking about it. This morning my nosy neighbour, we all have that one, came by to give me the gossip for the week. It was my day off, so I was sweeping my driveway, and my neighbour told me that someone had broken into a house in the neighbourhood yesterday. Nothing had been stolen, but the shower had been used, the kitchen was messy from cooking, the bed had been slept in, and all the TVs were on. But the truly disturbing thing was that the family pet had been killed. Obviously I don't live in a nice neighbourhood, and a lot of my neighbours have cameras and alarm systems for this reason. But I couldn't stop thinking about this guy knocking. According to some neighbours, they'd seen this weird guy around the block, supposedly selling some cleaning products and supplies. But he was only carrying a clipboard around. I went to the neighbours that live across the street from me, as I know they have cameras, and I was hoping maybe they'd caught something. So for 3 days, this guy had knocked on my door at the same time every day. I guess his MO was to make sure no one was home all week, then break in. But what would have happened if I had stayed quiet like I normally do when someone unknown knocks at my door? He would probably have come in with me in the house, and that creeps me the hell out. When I was walking back into my house, my doorbell caught my attention. It was full of some gunky, sticky stuff, like someone had attempted to cover the camera. So I guess I should definitely replace it now. There's talks of some neighbours having video evidence, and others say they'd actually seen the guy. It's all still going on, and I'm sure I'll know more about it these next few days. I'm feeling super anxious though, and thinking of going on a trip to visit my family, just to get away for a bit. I don't live in the US, so the way police handle matters here is different. I've just started going out again since the COVID restrictions lifted, and I managed to go out on a date last night. After dinner we both decided to go out to a bar. Now I'm a lesbian and she's pansexual, so we decided to go to a gay bar, as there's usually a nice vibe, and we don't have to worry about getting intimate, as there's usually less creepy men too. We sat down in an outside section, and two girls from a table over decided to come over and sit with us. They were both smoking, which I don't have an issue with, but the first red flag was the girl who sat next to me, who immediately started blowing smoke in my face. She was tatted up, but honestly looked about 14, and it was clear she was trying to throw off some tough exterior. Completely unprompted, she began telling us that she was a dominatrix, how much money was coming into her bank account, as she handed my date her card to buy drinks with, and that she drove a car and had a motorbike, pointing to a car on the street that was supposedly hers, despite drinking and therefore can't drive. Plus, in our city, overnight parking on the street isn't an option, as during a recent extreme flash flooding, it sent entire towns underwater by 15 meters in some places, and apparently she just drove through it on her motorbike. Now these things, whilst small, immediately began ringing alarm bells in my head, as I know exactly the type of person who talks like that unprompted. I've dated a few, and they've always been bad news and full of BS. To start with, no one with a substantial amount of money hands their debit card out to strangers to go to the bar with. At some point she began to make comments on my sexual experiences. Now I don't generally sleep around as it's not my thing, so my body count can be counted on two hands. But she went into depth about sex and how I don't know the ins and outs of it because of my low body count. She then went into detail about the different things she's experienced. And I will say now that I have no idea why I gave her that information. But I was a bit drunk and tend to be more honest, like most people when they've had a drink. I was obviously unimpressed by her crap, and her demeanour was so disrespectful. She'd had an argument with another girl, saying that there was no way she could be bi because she was wearing a cardigan, then began asking my date and I about our sexualities, if we were single, etc., and putting her hand on our backs to bring us closer to her. At this point I messaged my fake husband to tell him I'd be giving her his number, socials, or would need him to call me if I needed an out. But the absolute creepiest thing was when she picked up a straw and tried to put it in my drink. I slapped my hand over it then, because no matter what the intentions were there, it wasn't happening. Drugs or COVID, I don't care. Keep it all away from me. It was by far the creepiest, grossest experience I've ever had, and probably the biggest alarm bells I've ever gotten in such a short time from a stranger. Okay, so I'm not conventionally pretty, nor classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any group of friends I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected or kidnapped, and I've never had to worry about my own safety when going out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around because I'm so plain. It's always me that has to be on the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. I like to go to a local bar almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there. I just get a Coke and wait for my ride home, and it's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. Well, a few weeks ago, I had just gotten off work and was chilling at my usual spot, sipping on my drink whilst working on a new pendant I was making. I'd started wire wrapping crystals into jewellery. I didn't think anyone would try to talk to me, since I knew I basically blended into the walls, even though the staff know me and pay me slight attention, and are nice to me. But this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and looked up at him, then struck up a small conversation. I can't even remember how I started it, but he asked me a few questions about myself that I thought were normal enough, and it all flowed together, so I didn't think much of it. Again, I'm plain and didn't think anyone would want to do anything to or with me. I had drunk 3 glasses of soda by then and had to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and purse and went to the bathroom. I may not have been worried about being abducted, but I do worry about my identity, cash, and contacts. I went back a few minutes later and went back to working, since none of my stuff had been touched. I called a waitress over and asked her for a new drink, and she nodded, as it had always been ingrained in me that you never leave your drink unattended, and if you do, have it remade or leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab for my old drink, which only had a few sips taken out of it, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying I was being wasteful for just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion, and asked him why it was his business if I did. It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason, which annoyed me, so I told him again that it was my business, and that if he didn't like it he could always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress off with letting her change my drink. But I'd had enough of his nonsense and told him flat out, "Then you drink it if you think it's such a waste." This seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me shocked, then a bit angry, before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress, telling her that something didn't feel right about the guy, and if she could tell the bartender to keep an eye on him and dump out my drink, then just bring me water from then on. I left for home then after being picked up shortly after, and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault, though I didn't find out until today what exactly had happened. Apparently he'd gotten into a fight with the bartender, as he'd caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, so he stopped her from drinking it. The guy got mad and it started a whole fight. The cops were called and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently he was trying to see if he could get someone like me, who always had her guard down because her confidence was low, and he thought I'd be an easy mark with just a little attention. But when I didn't just drink my drink when I came back, he had to try another girl. If he really was targeting me though, I have to question his sanity and sobriety. Thank goodness for those old lessons about safety when growing up. Thanks, Mom and Dad. And to the guy at the bar, let's not meet again. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.